right, Ryan. So, we've been touching base over the years, last 15, 16 years, and I love, love, love that you keep track of all the stats. And really, I just wanted to do it at the 1,000 foot level, not like, okay, here's the stats on what's going on, but why do the stats? So tell us a little bit about your journey, like how you got to doing what you do, and then following up with why you do the stats.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm an appraiser by trade, and so I started this. I used to actually be a middle school teacher, and I loved it. I had so much fun.
What grade?
Sixth through eighth.
Okay.
We moved to Sacramento. I'm like, what am I going to do? We relocated in I think 2002 and 2001, something like that, and fell into that and loved it. But wife got pregnant, and that salary wasn't going to cut it. And so I knew some appraisers, and I said, "Hey guys, would you be willing to train me?" And the rest is history there. But it's interesting because I think, you know, most people don't think I'm going to go into real estate, or I mean, nobody when they're seven says I'm going to become an appraiser, of course, right? But I remember taking a class years ago. This had to be right sort of after the Great Recession, or somewhere in there. And I learned how to start to visualize data. I was using numeric and Excel to make some simple scatter graphs, and my world was changed. I thought this is the coolest thing ever. I had no idea that you could export sales from MLS and make pretty graphs. And so I think I was hooked. And I think the problem with stats is it's like a layer of an onion, and you just keep peeling back, and there's always something more to explore. And so, I have that problem where I'm like, well, what about this? What about that? And I just have an insatiable appetite. And so I don't know, I feel like I discovered something that I really like though with how do you tell the story of the market, but how do you understand it? And then how do you visualize it where it makes sense? And not everything you do is going to make sense. Some people are like, hey, you really nailed that one, and hey, that one didn't. But that's trial and error. We get on base and hopefully score runs over time.
Yeah, and what I think nobody really see, well, nobody does see except yourself is all the failed attempts. Because I know that as you run down those rabbit holes, there's a lot of them that end up being gopher holes or varmint holes, and you're just like, okay, I learned a bunch of stuff, but I can't explain it to anybody, and it doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it becomes part of that stack of knowledge that's in your brain, and then helps you later to maybe come up with a great nugget.
For sure. And then there's some stuff where it's like, well, I think this is really interesting, but I think this is going to be confusing, or
Yeah.
through the years I kind of learned that some stuff just isn't going to appeal to, like, people just don't care. And so so what is it? What is it? It's not just, stats, but it's also how do we package that in a way to be interesting. And I think that's the challenging part sometimes, and we never compromise what the stats say. Never
Mhm.
ever, water down the story. It is what it is, but how do we interpret this and then package it? That's a huge thing, I think.
Well, Ryan,
Okay.
one thing from the real estate perspective, from the real estate community, you basically have brought something to the industry that hasn't been done on a regular basis, and that's talking about the stats, knowing about what the market is all about. Now we're starting to see a lot of offices providing some stats, and MLS itself is also providing some really good stats. But I think from what you've been doing, you kind of opened the door to what stats are all about. And and I got to tell you, in our industry, when Ryan speaks, everybody goes, Ryan Lundquist. Oh, okay. Everybody shuts up and listens. It's like the E.F. Hutton. and, and so you've been doing it long enough. You've created a great rapport in our industry. I know I've always sat in a lot of stuff, and we've known each other for quite a while and had some great conversations. But
Yeah.
um, yeah, that's from the real estate community perspective. So you have brought some really good things, and your stats are just staggering. And how you come up with some of this things. Like today, I just saw the one about the island, and I go, how does he come up with an island? I mean, and it was brilliant the way you did that. So
No, right on. I appreciate the kind words. Thank you so much. That's very nice. So, and I don't know. I have fun. I think it's an absolute blast and to try to figure out what's interesting out there and how can we, create conversation and, and bring it around to what do these numbers mean? Like today, I talked about price metrics are actually up from 1 year ago, but well, what does that mean? And, are we back? And it's like, well, we had a dull market last year, kind
mhm.
of a normal one this year. So of course they're up. So I don't know. We just have to be careful about interpretation, know what we're comparing to.
Correct,
Yeah,
correct.
I think that's super important because a lot of people, okay, so my favorite story about stats is doing lunch with John Orr, who was the Building Industry Association president. We did lunch back in 2011, and all the news was a rave saying that the market, the sales, new home sales had gone up 20% in the last month. And the first thing he said to me as I met him for lunch, he goes, "Yeah, it's easy to go up 20% when you go from 9 to 11 sales."
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Or it's like I could say in Saloni, I just did a presentation there, and I could say that short sales have increased by 900% since 2021. But there were like, there was I think one then, and then whatever the
And nine
percentages are now.
now.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. Yeah, and so yeah, it's silly. We got to be careful. Kind of like the saying goes, if you torture the stats long enough, they'll confess to anything. So it's true.
Yeah. So, what have you found to be the stats that are most important, or and by most important, I mean the ones that aggregate to people the most? What are the ones that you see ripple through the audience when you give them?
You know what? I mean, I think that there's an obsession with anything related to prices.
Hmm.
I feel like, that's sort of the caboose on the train. And it's sort of like you see all these other interesting things, what's happening with the number of pendings and consumer sentiment. And then eventually whatever's happening there at the front shows up in the stats a couple months later. And so I don't know. I'm not so obsessed with prices and, we got to keep prices higher. And I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
Markets are always changing. We don't, I don't know. I feel like especially the real estate community really gets tied to this idea that the market is good if prices are rising. And I find that to be a pretty limiting mindset. Because maybe during half your career, prices might go up and the other half they might be going down or flat. And so, but I don't know. I mean, I think that the prices that resonate, yeah. I mean, metrics that resonate, yeah. What prices are doing. I think in recent years, I've been given a lot more focus so on, hey, what's happening with seller behavior and like the number of new listings hitting the market. And, that's something that I didn't used to cover much, but I think when COVID happened, it was like, whoa, sellers, backed off the market and it really changed things. And it shows we see this market that feels very stuck. And, I think and there's like all this comparison to 2008, but, we had about 10,000 more active listings at the time. And so, when people go, why haven't prices crashed? I mean, that's why. But I think I'm always interested in just, what's happening with the number of pendings and, the number of listings and the number of sales. That's so simplistic, but I think with those things, I think we find a lot of interest. But I'll say this, I'm not interested in just like, I see all these images. Here's the number of active listings. I'm like, okay, but if I don't have any point of reference, anything to compare that to, like it
Yeah.
just doesn't mean that much. I could say,
Hmm.
well, here's the number of, kids who, have experimented with drugs in California. It's like, okay, but how does that compare to the past? Like it doesn't, we don't have any context. We can't assign any meaning there. And so I'm not a big fan of sort of isolated stats. I want to know the story. And for a story, I feel like we need more context. And so that's always the important thing. I think a lot of people on social media, they'll share maps from Zillow or Redfin or wherever with the number of listings. And
Hmm.
um, and I did it the other day for Sacramento to prove a point. Our listings locally are actually a little bit lower than last year. We're missing about 1,000 listings from a normal year like 2019. But I zoomed in and I was like, doesn't this look like a crazy amount of listings? The market's, going to tank, but that's what we can do without any context. And if we don't know what normal looks like that map, if we had one from 2008, it would have been flooded with, like I said, 10,000 more listings, and it would have
Yeah,
looked totally different. But I think when we're not used to what does this isolated image look like? It can be dangerous. Or like, notice the default, here's properties that are in the
Hmm.
foreclosure process. Like, man, for 10 or 15 years, people like show me those stats. I'm like, okay, but what does normal look like? Because this sounds really alarming and scary. There's always properties that are going through the foreclosure process, but how has this changed? Because that's the big thing.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
and it yeah, it's still low. I heard 25 years ago when I first started that there was usually about 3% of buyers well, owners that were having trouble making their mortgage payment. And so I look at that and now, and it's like, well, there's a lot fewer than 3% right now. A lot fewer than 3%. Yeah, and see, I don't know if that's stat. That's another really interesting thing about stats is that they shift over time. Like what the average is shifts over time because the market shifts, the demand shifts, the intentionality shifts, the way that people, not the overall way they buy homes, but the way that the banks and the lenders are qualifying mortgages shifts, um, etc. So
Yeah.
it's interesting because I've been doing this since 2000, and so I didn't see pre 2000, but I think I came in at a great time because we were on the internet just barely, a DOS program to get in into
Yeah.
the internet. And but then starting to look at stats in 2003 and 4 and 5 and Excel and doing the things you're talking about and looking at those numbers, they shifted from pre 2007, 2008 to to 2012, and then after 2012 19, and then now. And then each of those markets are very different based on number of actives, number of pendings, number of sales, price increases, months of inventory, etc.
Yeah, no,
So,
I agree. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I understand is the default rates are seem to be going up a little bit more, but I don't think we are going to experience anything like we have between '08 and '09, and
yeah,
I keep getting asked, Mike, when's the crash going to happen? And I keep saying it's not. So my point of view is in the '08, '07, '06, everybody was refinancing their house and using their house as an ATM machine, and they were pulling the equity out. Well, right now there's a tremendous amount of equity in the real estate community. Plus, what's holding everybody back from refinancing is their 2% loans or 3% loans. They're not pulling the equity out as readily as they did in pre pandemic and pre um, the '08. So because of that, I think it's holding everything in check. And I don't think we're going to see a huge decline in the industry. Now, when I say huge, I mean like what happened in '08. We lost anywhere between 40 to 55%, depending on what street you're on. This time, I believe that we'll probably see 10, 15, maybe something like that in any kind of a reset. Um, and Joel and I, we look at things across the nation too. So they're having some experiences also, but there's tremendous equity across the nation in real estate right now because nobody's refinancing and pulling the cash out.
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. No, I'd concur. It feels like the market's very stuck, and
Mm-hmm.
you have low buyer demand, but you don't have this mechanism where listings hit the market and it helps prices go down. Whether that's fast or slow, it's just without more inventory hitting, it makes it very challenging to see, sharp price change, or even like, very slow. In Sacramento, we look at our, like Zillow's price index would show we're down about 7% from mid 2022. And that's pretty astounding to look in 4 years. We've gone down 7%. Like that's pretty wild. And so you have these people in these articles with sensational titles that this housing analyst says that we're going to drop by 50%. And they're like, well, like, let's see supply increase. There's not a formula that where the market always has to behave, in a similar way, but one of the big pieces of the puzzle is supply to help change the market. And that's the part that I think that, I would say, unfortunately, that we aren't seeing much of a change in. And even this year, sellers have started to pull back a little bit. Iran war, you know, inflation, and so you see a little bit there. And last year, a little bit tariffs, and so it's just this. It feels like the market wants to heal more and sellers want to come back, but
Mhm.
then you have all these that are stuck in place. The math is tough. And so there's just not that mechanism to sort of unleash in the market. We don't have that vibe.
hmm I was just having a conversation with somebody the other day, and we were talking about the market and the buyer pools and how that all works. Well, you get the complaints or the feedback from the locals saying, "Oh, the prices are going up. I'm getting priced out. I can't buy a house." Well, and when you take a look across the United States and look at all the different communities, and what I think is happening is the locals are getting priced out. The activity is still there because the outsiders are coming in. So, for example, in Tennessee, there's a little town called Cookville. Everybody's complaining that, hey, I can't buy a house. I'm getting priced out. Well, yeah, that's what's happening. And you have everybody moving into the smaller communities. They're leaving Nashville. They're leaving some of the higher end places and moving into something that's affordable for them, which is putting the local people and pushing them out. So everything is like a snowball running downhill. Whenever somebody looks at their community and say, I can't buy a house, there is a place that they can go buy a house. They just have to go further out. So they're going to another community and saying, this is now affordable. So they become the outsider coming into that neighborhood or that little town. And all the locals are saying, I'm getting priced out. I can't buy a house anymore. So we get this domino effect of migration across the United States. That's my perspective of what's going on. Yes, everybody locally in whatever community they live in are getting priced out because of the constant migration that's going across the nation. Even local in California, Sacramento are saying, hey, I'm getting priced out. Well, you got all the Bay Area people moving in and picking up the properties because they'll pay full price because it's way better than where they came from.
Yeah, yeah, I think that it's like every market has their their outsider coming in, and in Florida it's the buyer from New
Mhm.
York, or California, or it's the Bay Area buyer, or maybe Sacramentans move, elsewhere. And I always think of, where's ground zero? Where does it all start? And I think Californians take a lot of the blame for that, with having equity and deploying that in lower priced markets. But yeah, it's a thing, and I think it's unfortunate. It's the reality that we have. Doesn't sound healthy or seem healthy, but it's what we have. But it's interesting when you think about affordability, that affordability has to do with, can locals afford it? Sacramento is one of the most affordable markets in the state of California. That doesn't
Yeah.
mean that's the case for locals, though.
Correct.
Compared to the coastal, areas and portions of LA and Orange County, yeah, I mean, we're a steal. So compared to the Bay Area, I think, you look at our market and about 10% is above 1 million. But you look in San Francisco, and I think I ran stats, last month, and it seemed like 90% of sales were above 1 million. And so we're a totally different vibe here.
hmm hmm
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel as if I'm inclined to think that we already saw our downward trend, and that was 2022. And we saw here in Sacramento, we saw a 16% drop over 6 months from May to December.
Hmm.
And then we've just been going more or less up and bouncing along for the last
Yeah,
year or two. Uh,
yeah.
and and it has a lot to do with interest rates. I know the federal government at federal side, they'd like things to go, the interest rates to go down. That makes people happy. It makes them vote on their side. Uh, but I just don't see how we're going to get that inventory, like you're saying. Like, where's it going to come from? I've got
Yeah.
under 3% interest rate on my mortgage. Why would I sell and go buy something that's 6?
Yeah, yeah, there would have to be a really compelling reason. We do see that I ran some stats the other day in both Placer and Solano, both presentations, where I had recently, and about 15% of all listings right now last sold on MLS between 2020 and 2025. Now, you look and, there's like 5, 6, 7%. I mean, probably half of those do have a low rate, but again, how many people bought and aren't going to sell, or how many people refied and are sitting in this place, and so you wouldn't even see them in the stats, and so
Yeah.
that's a hard thing, but it feels like a slow burn where over time affordability can improve through wage growth or prices softening. If we, do get more supply, that would be a great thing. But there's not a mechanism in place to see a really sharp change to affordability. And so I always tell people in my presentations, I'm like, hey, this is a game-faced market, and you want to be full of hope, but you want to be realistic that we're in a low volume situation for the foreseeable future. So it's just the way it is. Let's be realistic about it, embrace it, and then figure out how to have a fantastic life in the midst of it. If you wait for the market to
Yeah.
improve before having a good life or thing, I wish we could go back to when things were so good in 2021. I'm like, well, yeah, we can't though. And so what can we do right now to have a vibrant life? And if we're waiting for a vibrant market, I think that's a real mistake and in life.
Maybe
Yeah.
4 years from now, we'll be looking back and say, gosh, I should have done something in 2026, because
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
forever moving forward and we're constantly looking back. One thing that I think would be interesting, and I don't know how to acquire the information, but if there was a field in our MLS that when you create a sale, where did those sellers go? Did they stay local and buy? Did they retire and go to another location? Why are they selling? And that would be a very interesting stat when,
Yeah, that would be fascinating.
yeah, I'm thinking that people that own multi-million dollar homes in the Placer County or El Dorado counties and stuff, those people are shifting. They're either baby boomers and now making choices to go be with their kids or be in a different location or downsizing, et cetera. That could be a percentage, or it is a percentage of the sales that are going on. It would be curious to see how big that percentage is or how small it is.
Yeah, I
So,
wish I wish there was a quick way to know that. And sorry, Mike, I cut you off.
no, no, that's fine. And I don't know how to do that other than maybe there's a field that we can convince our um, local MLS to set up, so at least we can put some data in there and run some stats on that. But I don't know. That's kind of like Privacy Act, and it might be a little
Yeah,
bit too
yeah.
much, but
They might not tell you the truth.
that's true.
Yeah. And like if I was moving, I'm like, I'm not telling you where I'm moving to,
Exactly.
So
Right.
everyone else can do it though, not me. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't want.
I know. By the time migration stats come out through the Census Bureau and other sources, I mean they're speaking to a market that's, it's crusty, it's old data.
Hmm.
Or like the Department of Finance pushed out some interesting stats, and I pushed some out for, I think, 12 local counties, and it's fascinating, but it's based on the difference between 2025 and 2026 January 1st, but it's also just county-wide. You kind of see some areas that are contracting and some areas that are growing. Surprisingly, Sacramento has actually had a lot of growth overall in the region, but gosh, the Census Bureau stuff is so much better though. But still, I wish it was more robust. They used to have this awesome source. I can't even remember what it was called. But you could click on it and see how many people moved from Sacramento to various zip codes. But again, like the
Really?
data was like 4 or 5 years old. And so I mean, how valuable is that when, things have changed? It was called the Census Flows Mapper, and they've discontinued that. I thought it was one of the coolest things that they had. But it is what it is. But yeah, I would love to see that field though. Let's bring it.
Yeah, I was wondering maybe moving companies, they track all that stuff. So you got Hertz and Penske and all these different moving companies that are moving everybody around. Well, they've got internal stats, I'm sure, that can be tapped into. So you compile all those different companies into one data point, and you could probably see a trend. It wouldn't be one pinpoint accurate, but it sure as heck would really open a few eyes. Um,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I would think it would be at least 80% of the activity could be tracked.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would love for more robust stats. I know John Burns Real Estate Consulting, they do put out some migration stuff that seems to be timely. It's often behind a paywall though.
Hmm.
But it's still just how are they getting that? I'm not totally sure. I do concur though that I think a big portion of the market has to do with people making those lifestyle changes where it's like I hear from property managers, who is selling, and it's often the people who are investors who are, thinning out their portfolio in California because they're making a personal move,
Hmm.
and so it's a lot of different things as always. And I'm not saying that's the bulk of the market, but I think it does explain I mean, some of it for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Um, Ryan, what's a stat that you love and you feel like is really important and nobody cares about?
What do you think? I'm trying to think.
That gets you all jazzed up, and they don't, nobody cares.
Um, oh gosh, I'm having trouble thinking about something right now, but I'll just say this. Sometimes I feel like there's a relationship and or correlation. The more I get excited about something,
Mhm.
the worse my content will do. And so I feel like my post today, it's super interesting. There's some funny stuff in there about buying a private island. Then we get heavy into the numbers, uh but I don't know. It's like the more excited I'm like, this is so cool, then it almost means like it's the death blow to attention. Um, but I will say I changed my stats last year. I'm trying to automate a lot more stuff. And so I have this really cool spreadsheet where I can quickly dump into some data and make a few tweaks and it doesn't take me that long to have these recap visuals. But I've found though is that I almost have too much information on this one visual. So I think that's awesome, but I feel like it's less, it's maybe too much for
Mhm.
consumers to digest. And so as frustrating as it is, I may actually dial that back. For the sake of being more palatable. I find that if there's too much information, it's just too hard to interpret. Or like yesterday, I pushed out the top 100 cities in a 12 county region for sales volume. It's like honestly awesome stats. Um, but I think my it was maybe a little too small. It was broken up into 4 different images, so don't shoot me. It wasn't on just one. But I maybe needed to do that in 8 instead of 4. And that's good for Instagram where people can just swipe. The content did really well on Instagram.
Mhm.
It pretty much sucked everywhere else though. And so it's sort of like when a platform is there and you can swipe, it can do well, but there's no other social platform where you do that. And so it's like sometimes content it's formatted in a way and it might work really great somewhere and then it'll
Mhm.
flop elsewhere. It's just a function of where is the system. So it almost just underscores like we've got to know the DNA of the system and we've got to know the audience and then cater toward that. But I don't know. One thing I'm finding though is that I've gotten a little bit away from so many graphs and I find that sometimes like on social media, sometimes just an image with a couple sentences with a a blatant stat can do very well. And so
Mm.
Hmm.
people don't always want a pretty graph. And so I try to do a bunch of different things. But yeah,
Just throwing in here, I like the graphs because I like the perspective.
me too. Me too. Absolutely. I just find that the algorithm just you got to mix it up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And people need flavor and so it's almost like I can't just share, a scatter graph or, line graph or bar graph or whatever it is every single day. It's got to be mixed up because not everyone interprets that. Or
Hmm.
right.
I'll make a bar graph and a line graph, and I'm like, which one's better? And it's like split down the middle. Like there is no one
Really,
truth. Like, yeah, it just I don't know. Yeah, you can't win with everyone. That's it's just true in life. It's true in stats. But we want to just consistently try to take a stab at how can I visualize this in a way that where it makes sense. And it's always for me, it's a really great compliment when someone says, "Hey, you make stats simple," or "I understand it." And there's like economist types that I follow on Twitter, and
yeah,
I just sometimes look at their stuff and I'm like, I don't even understand what this is. Like, I'm having a
Hmm.
hard time interpreting, and I'm a pretty smart guy with this kind of stuff. Like, this is really
yeah.
confusing, man. And I don't know. I just
Hmm.
feel like it's got to be, if it's not palatable, like, I don't know, can't we do better? So,
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I totally understand because sometimes, okay, well, not uncommonly, you find that you have to go to the complex before you can come back and make it simple. So you go to the
yeah.
complex and then you go, okay, what's really important about this? And then you extract everything else. And I jokingly say, or tongue in cheek say that, my favorite graph is the ones from the MLS where it's like 14 different counties over the last 10 years. And there's all these lines going everywhere. And your brain just goes, you're
Yeah.
like, nothing. Like, I got nothing. What do I do with this?
Yeah.
Like, why is this graph even here? I mean, I love it, but break it out into 4 slides of like three each or something like that.
I
Anyway.
know, I know. I have a crazy one. It's the median price in 12 counties since 2012. And
Hmm.
it's actually awesome because you can see that all the counties have done the same thing through the years,
Right,
but
right,
they're at
right,
totally different levels. But I
right.
also have a graph like that for the Bay Area.
Yeah,
And Solana County's median price would be like, 550,000, but you
yeah.
have some Bay Area counties that are 2.3 million. And so this graph is total junk. And I make that one. I go, does this one work? No. I'm like, okay. And then I literally have on there when I send out the PDF, do not use this one. This is total garbage. And so sometimes we look at stuff and go like, okay, that won't work because the price range is just it's so vast, but it can
Yeah,
work if there's similarities. So,
yeah. Well, and
So,
sometimes it's like I've done one, and sometimes it's very informative because you'll have, let's say, 5 or 6 different counties, and you'll see one outlier, whether it's not going up or you'll see one of them goes crazy and the rest are kind of all trending together. And I find that's very informative too.
so Ryan,
yeah.
have you tried overlay? So, for example, you have the Bay Area, and then you have a percentage of movement in the value of the properties. So even though you're playing with 2.2 or multi-million dollar properties, it does its thing. But then you come to Sacramento and you're saying, well, this is 500,000. You can't really compare the dollars for dollars, but maybe you can compare the percentage of movement and then overlay those and say what's happening to the Bay Area opposed to Sacramento based on the percentage of movement. So if Sacramento goes up 2, 3, 4%, does the Bay Area moving 2, 3, 4% in the opposite direction or in a forward direction?
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that idea. I think if I were to, take a stab at that, I'd have to do that. But it's also you have the problem of smaller counties, and
Hmm.
there's not as much data, and so it is wonky from month to month. You're going to sound like a crazy person if you try to
Hmm.
report on stats. Like El Dorado County is a good example, but a lot of Bay
Yeah,
Area
it
counties,
is.
if you have a few hundred sales, that might not be enough. Or especially like El Dorado, if there's like 88 sales in a given month, I mean, it's so manic. We're up 20%. No, we're down 5. We're up. It's just it gets so crazy. But similar dynamic with the Bay, or the problem too, the trend isn't the same in every, nine Bay Area counties. Like San
Right.
Francisco is, freak on a leash right now. It's going crazy because there's so much luxury, and that's moving up the median price tremendously,
Mhm.
but that's not the same vibe in Vacaville, right? And
Right.
so I don't know. There's always these things to consider. I like your idea though. Actually, one thing I'm going to do with some of my stats, I think it's really cool that one thing that's not working, Joel, you asked. I'm pushing out stats for 12 counties now, and I'll say
Right.
that I've been strategic. Like I've recognized and that we're in a low volume market, and that
Yeah.
means that I need to expand my network. I want to keep growing, and my readership on my blog. I want to keep connecting with people. I want to keep getting referrals, all that stuff. And so I need to cast my net wider. It's led to speaking engagements. It's been really cool, but you know what's not working in some smaller counties? Monthly data. And so I've been
Mm.
having these warnings like, hey, don't put much weight on this on Sutter, Yuba, in Nevada. But what I'm going to start doing in those counties, I just have to pull, 90 days last year compared to 90 days this year. I just have to
Yeah.
switch it in 90-day chunks. And I know that. I have known that. I've done that before, but in me trying to automate and get, more efficient, I just need to for those ones do the 90 days. Because it's not working, and I don't like putting out stats where I have to go, okay, this is really cool, but don't put any weight on it. Because I know if people aren't well versed in that, then they're going to take that
Hmm.
and be like, we're up 30% this year, or we're down 20%, and it's just so I'm kind of, as of next month, I'm going to reformat almost half the counties. So um,
Right. Now, another thing
That
that I
makes
do, and I
sense.
pull, this is from the kind of the macro end of it, the real economists. Um, it is what they'll do is they'll do like a 60-day moving average, or and probably in these, you probably need to do a 90-day moving average. Because what it does, if you track, because you'll get 60 sales and then 80 sales, and that's like a 33% increase month to month, and then down, and so everything looks manic. And so what I've seen, I think that when I've looked at the numbers that I'm analyzing, and that's kind of the problem. And so what I'll do is I'll do a 2 or 3 month moving average. So like, what's the moving average of number of sales, of number of active, of number of pendings, etc., just so that I can have kind of, okay, this is the trend, and then the other one goes like that all over
yeah,
the trend.
exactly. I like that. Yeah.
So
What I noticed too is that all of our local counties, like you could look at Sacramento, everything
yeah,
else is doing the same thing, but
yeah.
how you get there is a fully different experience, That hike
Ha-
is going to take longer like that, but it's really going the same direction.
Oh, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. Where it'll go up and then it'll be flat and then it'll go down
Yeah.
and then it'll go up, but it's still all kind of trending the same
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
Like I can think I spoke in El Dorado and Nevada County recently, and
Hmm.
both those have like smaller data. And I walk people through like the absurdity of relying on the median sales price.
Yeah.
It's just because it bounces around so much, and we talk about why, but then I'm like, okay, but look at Sacramento. Isn't it doing the same thing? And it doesn't mean that luxury couldn't be different than, entry level, all that stuff, but I don't know. I just think it's important to do that. But I also find myself more interested today in a low volume market in other price indexes. And so I'm looking and reporting a lot on, I'm looking at Zillow's price index for Sacramento region, Freddie Mac price index, homes.com, and traditional, price metrics at, median average price per square foot. And they're really honestly all telling about the same story. But in El Dorado, you could see Zillow's index would say down 1% from a year ago. And that's
Hmm.
a whole lot better than down 8%, up 20% when you look at the median. I feel like
Yeah.
almost like as it much as it pains me to say, like I think Zillow's index, at least for El Dorado, is a whole lot closer to, being usable than the median. So
Right. Now with the Fred data, the federal data, and using the index, I've never really been able to square that in my mind with the prices, because I use the prices, which is this is how, and then figure out what the average trend is, where they're using the index of like dead marked at 100, or marked at 100 in like 2002, and then going over that. index. Now I'm probably getting too technical there, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and I think that's where it's weird because it's like you can look and be like, what does 216 mean? Or whatever the number is
Exactly.
today.
That's my
And
concern.
that's what I don't like. But you can also see, you could track movement over time and go, oh
Yeah.
gosh, however they're tracking that, they're a repeat sales index. And so they're
Hmm.
only looking at sales that have sold again, which I think is a fascinating way to look at the market. Is it a perfect way? No, but there's no such thing as a perfect metric or one perfect way to understand the market. But with that, I feel like they're doing a pretty good job overall. It's kind of their index, it kind of lags. It comes out like 30 days, after everyone. So I'm like, come on,
Okay.
guys. But but I think that it feel like it's telling a somewhat similar story overall.
Yeah.
It's down a little bit more than other indexes right now, and so it's sort of like I'm actually watching that. Okay, are they onto something, or are they maybe a little bit, too aggressively negative? Or like Homes.com, I don't know what they do with their index, but I think it's too extreme. I should say too extreme. Like they'll show we're down 3% from 1 year ago.
Hmm.
Every other index might be, as of last month, down 1.5%. I feel like Homes.com I'm giving less weight to what they're saying. And so, but what I
Hmm.
like though is I'm looking at all of these going, okay, how do we credibly understand the market today? I feel like we need to add more things to our, bag of tricks and our skills. And I don't know if you know Resi Club with Lance Lambert. He does an amazing job with stats, but I became a pro member last year,
Hmm.
and it's so awesome having all of the, like, it's heavily reliant on Zillow's index, whether people like that or not. Works in some markets, it's going to lag in others, but I like
Hmm.
that I can pull up any zip code, and quickly in any county, any MSA, and just kind of see, well, what does their index show? And then I
Right.
got all my traditional stuff that I'm doing on my desk. So
Okay.
I don't know. I just find that to be helpful.
Now, question about how you're tracking data. And, the reason I ask is because I download everything, and really I just track Sacramento and then some other, the five counties peripherally around it. But Sacramento data I've been tracking since like 2004. So I have, 600 plus thousand, almost 700,000 individual sales, and and then I graph from there. So
Yeah.
what do you do to do you like keep the data in one place like I do? Or do you do it and just take the data, take the results, and then get rid of the data?
It depends. I'm not like you. I wish I had that. But it is what it is. But I typically do, like, I have some spreadsheets for different counties. I
Hmm.
keep, where I do my pivot tables, and I have like
Yep.
a ton of data there. El Dorado Hills, I've got all the sales ever, forever,
Yeah.
but for the whole region, no. And so I'll kind of each month, on a monthly basis, I'm going to export like, different months of data. But the problem is it like, if I make my 2025 May comparison to May 2026, I mean, I'm also, I've got to look at that May data again because there's probably 2% more sales than when I pulled it last year. And so it's like, you know what I'm
Isn't
saying?
that weird? Because
Because
I
there's
found that
takes
they don't
forever.
change.
Yeah. It
They
takes
don't
forever for
change.
like sales to be entered as closed. And
Yeah.
so at some point, like today, I pushed out my data. I pulled it all yesterday, June 9th. And it
Right.
is what it is. In an ideal world, I'd love to wait until the 15th. I don't think the market wants that. Trend Graphics pushes their stuff out on usually the 5th or 6th. I feel like that's a few days too early, but it's
Yeah.
like everyone's salivating, going, we want this. I like that Zillow for their data, they wait until at least the 15th of the month. I think that's probably the
Yeah.
best thing. But even then, it's like, I don't know. I mean, at some point we have to push it out, but we're going to have to refresh it because there's always going to be more sales that are going to get added to the system. So,
Yeah. And
Hmm.
I've sacrificed for that. I just push later. So whenever I'm pulling my stats, I usually pull, I like to pull by like the 15th of the month.
yeah,
At the
stoic.
minimum, like the ninth or 10th of the month, like like what you do. I
Yeah.
find if you pull 1 or 2 days after, you can be missing up to 1 or 2% in price change just on that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 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 It's such a big mistake to pull on the first for
Oh
the
yeah,
previous month, especially in a smaller area. But man, even in our largest county, Sacramento, yeah, huge mistake.
yeah,
So, but sometimes I push out stats, so and then I make a projection, and I my image says this is a projection for volume
right,
based on I'm like, you know what, we're probably going to have 7 to 8% more sales from the first, which is very real. Um,
yeah,
I mean, 10% would be pretty huge. I mean, sometimes, but and so I'm always conservative, but sometimes I do that, and then I can go, refresh that volume visual. But as if anyone cares anyway, I'm having integrity on my end though, and
right.
and and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing, and it's going to be somewhere in the
Ryan,
ballpark of
Ryan,
right.
we care,
Yeah.
we care.
Yeah, of course, but the average user,
No, they don't care.
no one's thinking about that stuff. And so,
Yeah,
but I always try to educate them like, hey, this is my projection, with volume, but I won't project the median price. It can go all over the place, up or down. Like I feel like that's not a safe projection when you're missing, probably 7, 8% of all the sales that aren't in MLS yet. And in a low
yeah,
volume market, that's just wait until it comes out. That's always my advice. I like that you're stoic though on the 15th, you're really crushing it. I got demands, man. I got to push that stuff out. So
yeah. No, you
That's
do,
true.
and I don't.
yeah.
Of course, no, hardly anybody looks at my stuff either, and I don't push it out to the market regularly. I kind of
Yeah.
do it intermittently, and anyway, well, okay,
Well,
so
Joel,
go
you're
ahead.
working on mostly a lot of out of state
Yeah,
stuff
right
too.
now
The
I'm looking at a lot of
stats.
out of state stuff, but um, so what's something, Ryan, that you wish you could do? Like, what's a stat you wish you could have but don't have it yet?
God, you're asking such good questions. And for anyone listening, I didn't get these in advance, and so this is, or if I did, I didn't read them because, um, so, um, I like the idea of, why did someone move? Where did they move to? I would love to have a stat that showed why people moved. That would be, amazing. I don't think that there's any stat out there like that. There's some surveys that I think are total garbage,
Yeah,
from really big trade organizations that we shouldn't give any attention to. But I think the why would be fascinating. I do think I wish we had more robust, foreclosure, you know, sort of data that was easy to get. Um, but let me think here. I don't know if I come up with anything, I'll let you know. That's just sort of off the cuff. What about you? What do you wish that you had?
that's a good question. Okay, so here's one I've been noodling on and working on and haven't quite figured out: dropout rate.
Yes.
That is,
Yes.
you have pendings and you have sales, but the sales are never in line with the pending. There's always a few people who drop out, and and so 1,000 pendings, 950, but it's not over. It doesn't overlap either, because you'll have people who will close in 3 days, and you have people that close in 90 days, and the average being 21 to 35 days. But you could have somebody who just went into escrow and then closes 3 days later, and somebody else who was in escrow for 90 days and then falls out.
Yeah.
And like, what percentage of those that are pending end up going away? And anyway, that's because I think that would express what in the market, like how committed to the process are the buyers that are in the market right now.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I get asked about that, and
Mhm.
I always say, well, that's tedious to pull, but I've also been conflicted about, well, what do I compare to? And am I going to look at, or people ask me like with listings, with cancellations, well, do I compare those to the number of new listings that hit the market? And, you know, um, Do we look at the number of active? Like it's just, I'm not totally convinced what I want to do, but Joel, I'll say this. I'm also convinced that there's a few nerds that care and the rest of the market doesn't.
I
And
know,
so,
I'm one of those nerds.
yeah, and I'll say this is that I pay really, really close attention to new listings. It is so important. I think some of the visuals I push out in that regard, they don't get as much attention. People don't care. Now, my audience is primarily real estate professionals,
Mm.
but I think that that's a stat that I'm probably more interested in than the actual market. But I think along with that, yeah, I sort of like when big data firms or your Redfins of the world will push out stuff like that. But sometimes those narratives can be really sensational also. And, you're kind of like, all right, what are you really gauging?
Yeah,
And
where are you getting your numbers, and are they
yeah,
accurate, or are you just like, because I've seen it where they'll just put together numbers and they'll go, okay, well, this is our criteria for creating this, and it's just made up, and it's not really well thought out. And
yeah, they have one, and not to knock Redfin, I really like their weekly stats, but
mm,
they do push out this narrative consistently that says that their narrative is that the number of sellers, the gap between the number of sellers and buyers is wider than it's ever been. And of course, their stats start in 2013. And
oh,
so
okay,
so it so like I use that a lot when I teach about the market, and then I show this graph like of active listings in our market versus sales. I'm like, and it goes from 2001 onward. It's like very clearly not the widest gap ever, but
yeah,
the way that they define buyers, like I respect this hunger and this appetite to go, how many buyers are in the market, not just with looking at closed sales, but current pendings and those shopping. But it's
yeah,
so confusing when you read it and you go like, what did I just read? And like you have all these fancy mathematical equations and you're like, okay, but whatever, like that sounds really smart. But if we're coming to the conclusion that this is the widest gap ever, maybe we just need to look and go, but maybe is there something wrong with the math if we're getting that conclusion when the stats, I don't think the stats support that.
yeah, yeah. I don't think, and not knowing anything about it, I wouldn't necessarily say the reality supports what they're doesn't support that to me. I I I've thought a fair amount about with regard to buyers. I don't consider a buyer really until you've made an offer. Like
Yeah,
you're not a buyer until you made an offer. And I know that they consider, oh well, how many buyers are in the marketplace that would do stuff. Well, there's a lot of buyers who say they want to be buyers and really aren't buyers. They're just looky loose. And
yeah, yeah,
and so
I
just
agree.
because somebody's looking on a Redfin or a Zillow and they're looking at property doesn't mean they're a buyer to me at all. It's like who's willing to go to the effort to contact an agent, to contact a lender, to get pre-approved, and to make an offer on a property. That to me is a buyer. And so I do see some of this peripheral stuff around. Oh, well, we have a whole bunch of people who are buyers, but it's the buyer pool that just isn't manifested yet in the marketplace. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. And then what follows on that is the what you know I want to call them the motivation, quantitative motivation stuff. Like, well, how do people feel about this stuff? And I, over the last 2 decades, as I've been looking at it, I don't feel that those are necessarily. I don't feel like they give a quantitative push one way or the other. That
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
you'll say, oh, the whole market, the sentiment is against home buying, and then there'll be more home buyers and more sales. And I'm
yeah,
like, well, that's obviously wrong. Um, and so kind of that quantitative touchy feely stuff. I I don't put any any quantitative expectation behind those. I just discount them from the equation. So
yeah,
I used to track it in things like the Wright report is, hey, here's the sentiment. This is what Michigan's saying, or whatever. And I just don't anymore because I found that the results don't necessarily parallel what they're saying is the trend across the nation of what people are saying. Because what people say and what they do are frequently there's a dichotomy between them.
Yeah, I gosh, I feel that in my life, you know.
Yeah.
It's true though. It almost feels like that, there's all these people out there talking about housing and they're trying to find all these anecdotal, sort of nuggets to explain the market. And I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating, but just because someone is in the Bay Area and they're typing in Sacramento in a search engine, like that person's not a buyer. And so you can see there's this,
Yeah.
big data company who pushes out these, so-called migration stats, and you're like, wait, but those aren't actually migrants. Those aren't people who are moving. And for years, we've been hearing about Sacramento as the hottest market in the country. But I'm like, that's really ironic because we've had about the lowest sales volume we've ever had. And so there's a blatant disconnect between that narrative and this idea of like, wow, these might be buyers. Like maybe they're future buyers. One thing I can say for sure is they aren't buyers right now. Or
Yeah.
like the one thing I see anecdotally that people pay attention to is Google Trends and search engines, and
Mm.
there's been a lot of focus on that this year. There's been a couple instances where need help selling my house or whatever the slogan was, and there was one other one, and people were like, sellers are struggling more than ever because of this, and I'm like, well, that could be true, or like, do people start searching that more? Once people start breaking these stories,
Because
and
it
does,
auto populates and they hit the
yeah,
button.
yeah. And does it line up with actual data? And ironically, this year, despite all the negativity about buyers and the market and uncertainty, we've actually had more buyers nationally. Pendings have been up, and then even locally, pendings have been stronger this year. Now, do those convert to actual sales? Our sales through May are stronger than last year so far in the region. But it just shows that there is a disconnect sometimes between the headline and someone trying to get clicks, these very anecdotal, type stories, and what we're experiencing in the real market, And it's not to discount anecdotal stuff. Like I heard yesterday, I was talking with a friend who, we were talking about a certain local builder who, let go of a certain amount of employees, and I go, okay, my antennas are up.
Yeah.
And that shows that, okay, new construction is a grind. But ironically, new construction volume is higher today compared to 1 year ago. Are
Hmm.
builders more profitable though? Well, probably not because they're having to lower prices or, offer more concessions to get more volume today. And so anecdotal
Yeah.
is important, but gosh, we just have to be careful. Otherwise we impose that on the market and that's all we see. And I feel like the doom narrative, especially, that's sort of everyone is a specialist in, anecdotal. Here's one map, there's no context. Here's a Google phrase, and I feel like it gets really uninteresting to me. I want to talk about the stats, and I want to talk about context and the interesting stuff. I don't want to bring a narrative to the table. That I just get so tired of that. I don't know. I don't want to be someone. I don't want to perpetuate fear or even perpetuate hope. I want to exude hope in my life, but I don't know, let's look at the numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. People have lived through a lot worse than this.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And that's not to discount how hard it is out there for affordability. Like
Yeah.
this is not a good situation with affordability. But it's what we have right now.
Let me
Hmm.
talk a little bit about affordability. So, um, I feel like, I was in Europe recently and talked to a real estate agent, and the prices relative to the rents, it still makes way more sense to rent in many other places around the world than it does in the United States. That is, it costs way, way, way more to buy a property. And and here in the United States, we have lending that so many places around the world just don't have. We have 30-year mortgages and fixed mortgages too.
And
So
50 year, I'm just kidding.
and we have a lot of land, and it's still the American dream. And I think that what what happened from like 2004 on for a while is that we got used to, hey, we have to work. We got used to, hey, it's going to be easy to buy a house. That is immediate financing, they would give you anything back in '05 and '06 and '07. Anybody wanted a loan, you'd get a loan. And then after that, there was the crumble, and everything was inexpensive. And so now it's, we're back to normal interest rates, and we're back. Yes, it is relatively unaffordable for people, but still, if you save for a while and you work hard and you have a job and you improve your life over time, you can get a house and you can get into a house, and it's still definitely possible. And you can get in FHA 3.5% down. And that's still very attainable to people. But I think that over the last 20 years, people have been looking at it as like, oh, well, it was pretty easy to get into a house and now it's kind of hard. Well, I think
Yeah.
in decades past, and Mike, you can speak to this better than we can,
Mhm.
is it was, you used to have 20% down or 30% down. You couldn't even get in with 3.5% down for a long time.
Yeah, we all have very, very short memories. For the young people that never grew up in the 80s, they just never understood what was
Yeah.
going on. And um, for us that were around in the 80s, and I was doing real estate in the 80s, well, the interest rates were 17 and 18%. Imagine trying to get a mortgage at 17 and 18% and buy a house.
Yeah.
Well, true, the houses were a lot less expensive in those days. You're buying a 60, $70,000 house, but everything is relative to your income. So my father-in-law many years ago explained something to me, and I go, "Oh gosh, that's quite interesting." And dealing with affordability, he said, "Well, when you go to buy a house, 1/3 of your income is your mortgage payment, and then now it's like 3/4 of your
Yeah.
monthly income is
It
your
is.
mortgage payment." So, uh, and I knew that many years ago. He brought that up, and he says, "If that way you can create a budget, you can do everything, and you can buy a house." And it's amazing that they're still lending today with higher ratios, debt ratios, and that could put a lot of people in stress. So if your alternator goes out in your car or your dishwasher goes out, you're a dishwasher away from disaster, and that's where the affordability comes in.
Yeah. I agree when the mortgage payment is $4,000 for an entry level price point, or, it's a lot of money.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I think, one interesting thing that I'm seeing is that there's boomers get all the hate,
Hmm.
online. And I think it's interesting because I have articles from the early 80s from the Sacramento Bee, and one of them, it talks about this group of the boom babies, and they didn't call baby boomers, I guess, then, but the boom babies who desperately want homes, but they can't participate in the market. And it's so interesting because you think that there's this famous comedian who, talks about boomers who they bought, homes with 17 raspberries and now it's worth 2 million. But there was that time when, like, man, it was so tough. But then we do see history where rates went down, and boomers unmistakably have had, massive advantage and massive wealth accumulation. Like, I'm not ignoring that part, but I think sometimes we do ignore struggle in previous generations.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And we're disconnected from that. I try to tell my Gen Z sons that. I say, hey guys, like, you're not the only generation to ever think about affordability. I have this article in the Sacramento Bee that talked about the median sales price in California going above $100,000 for the first time in the early 80s, and how much of a big deal that was. And right now, that's laughable, right? We're like, wait, what? I mean, you adjust for inflation. I mean, we've gone way above that.
Yeah.
It's just, I think sometimes we lose context with history, and there's a strange benefit when we look back and go, okay, wait, if other people have struggled, like, what does it look like for me? How can I figure this out? And I think that's what people need to, put their mindset on. And for some people, the answer is just, well, you're going to have to wait or explore a different market, or find a property that makes sense in, as a lower price fixer in a neighborhood where there's upsize.
Yeah.
or finding the right layout. I think that there's a lot of creativity in a market like today where you just wouldn't want to buy absolutely everything. But the last thing I'd say is that I think that what I'm starting to see online is that Gen X, which I'm Gen X, starting to get a little bit more heat. And I saw someone the other day called Gen X Boomer Light. And I was like, oh, it is coming. It's coming, baby. It is coming. And I saw the other day it's Boomers and Gen X. And so it's just, there's this generational labeling that I really abhor, but it happens in every generation. And then the older people get, the more they look down on the youngins. And I'm like, man, I'm against it on either side. People are falling into this generational trap. And I hated being young and seeing Time magazine writing articles about Gen Z being, or excuse me, Gen X being hopeless. And I was like, I never want to do that when I grow up and get older. And so far, so good. So I just I don't want to rag on Gen Z, and try not to rag on Boomers either. So
Well, Ryan, we so appreciate what you do and what you bring to the marketplace, and we love your stats and the clarity that you bring for our industry. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, and thank you.